Jack Maher. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Rich. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. I'm very interested in hearing about your book, Poppy, and how that came about, and the history and lineage that you have as a native in Colorado. Um, Before we get started, let me go ahead and just give the audience a brief introduction here for you, so they have an understanding of who you are before we dive into all of the juicy pieces of your life story. You are a fifth generation Colorado native who transitioned from distinguished broadcasting career to author historian. You're a four-time Emmy Award winning journalist, serving nearly 34 years at KUSA TV, Denver, as a multimedia journalist and an executive producer. You're the author of the historical novel Poppy, about a colorful Colorado life, which came out in 2023. It includes profiles of your grandfather, Eric Douglas, a pioneering curator who elevated Native American art in major institutions. This book was selected by the Colorado State Library for inclusion in the Colorado Book Club resource. And through your latest work, You Were Chosen, Just Like Mary, a true story of love and faith, and public appearances, you explore themes of love, faith, grief, and transformation, bringing depth and personal resilience into your storytelling.
That's quite an intro. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I try to take that off of my guests versus just asking that question. Tell us about yourself. I think a lot of times that puts the guest in a defensive mode right off the bat. So I try to give as much information as possible so the guest is a little bit more comfortable.
Well, either that or we all have our little elevator speeches that
Yeah,
are kind of honed and pared down. And no, I appreciate the fact that you spared me all that.
for sure. So as you know, we were talking before we hit record. I kind of blew up my whole structured question to start off the conversation with. But let's just take the last part of it, which is what was life like for you growing up as a kid in Colorado?
Well, I was born here, but didn't spend a whole lot of time here
Okay.
because in the very early stages, uh, my dad was actually part of the golden age of Hollywood,
Oh,
and
wow.
he was a writer, and most of the work was out in Hollywood. And so, not long after I was born, he uprooted the whole darn shooting match and moved us out to Hollywood. And so I grew up in that environment.
Yeah.
And one of the shows that he was involved in was Love That Bob, or so the family story goes, and I'll explain that in a moment. But Love That Bob was a 1950s sitcom, really interesting, even when you look at it through the lens of today, about a fashion photographer who went from place to place in a flying car.
Oh,
And this
wow.
was a 1950s flying car. It actually did fly, where it was this little, tiny car that you bolted wings on and an engine, and it actually flew. Well, anyway, he was connected to that show, and as a kid, it was a pretty glamorous experience to be around all of these, producers and writers and actors. Bob Cummings was the lead in that show. He was a famous heartthrob from the 1940s, 50s. He starred in Alfred Hitchcock's Sabotage, among many other films.
Yeah.
And so this whole, television thing and playing the comic lead, I mean, it was definitely within his range. At any rate, to be totally honest with you in the audience, my dad struggled his entire life with alcoholism,
Okay.
and I think that affected a lot of his opportunities in Hollywood. It stemmed from his service in World War II. He was
Okay.
part of the Normandy invasion,
Yeah.
and he was awarded the Purple Heart after he was wounded. Saw some pretty rough stuff that he never talked about. But I think that was really the source of a lot of the demons that plagued him. And so um, the type of work that he was getting continued to dwindle, and he ended up having to leave Hollywood and move back here to Colorado for the family support that was being offered.
Mm.
And but for a while, while my brother and I were out there in California, it was a good life, Disneyland and Lake Arrowhead and Marineland, trips to the beach. It was all pretty cool. They would have these late night parties. My mom was a really gifted pianist who
Okay.
studied at the Juilliard School
Oh,
in
wow.
New York, so she was the real deal. And so we would, I know, sneak out of our bedrooms in our cowboy pajamas, our 1950s cowboy pajamas, and we would look at these adults, and it just all seemed so exotic. And it was, this smoke filled living room and laughter and all of that.
Yeah.
So there were good memories, but also bad ones because the alcoholism, again, just kind of really made a huge mark, a huge dent on the family.
Yeah.
As did my mom's mental illness that was hidden for many years,
Oh, wow.
but then surfaced, as our situation deteriorated. So kind of a mixed childhood,
Yeah.
and I'm quite candid about this in my new book that you referenced. You Were Chosen Just Like Mary, um, about just the impact that it had on my brother and myself. And I remember, Rich, being probably around 11. I think I was 11, and after things had descended to a lot of drunken fighting, police visits,
Mm.
neighbors gossiping about what's going on with the Maher family.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just remember after one particularly rough night making a promise to myself: I am not going to live like this. This is not going to be me when I grow up. And I've stuck to that promise. And so I tried to build a life and a family and a career that did not put me in that same space. And I don't blame my dad or my mom, who have both passed on.
Hmm.
These demons, you know I'm not sure they were things they really had the necessary tools to deal with in the
Yeah.
50s and
Right.
60s, not like we have today.
No.
So I'm appreciative uh, for what they were able to do. Um, and also, I think it helped me develop some survival instincts,
Okay.
which have served me well over the years.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand that that veteran perspective. My dad's oldest brother was in World War II, wounded, Purple Heart recipient as well. Came back, um, didn't talk about it. I don't remember any instance of him talking about that ever. Um, I do. I was able. I was able to see him in terms of fairly regularly. Both sides of my parents are from East Tennessee. So once he came back, he ended up going to work for Tom's Potato Chips as a truck driver. And he would travel from Knoxville all the way up here to Michigan and into Port Huron and cross into Canada and deliver potato chips. But through that time period of knowing him when and going to his house when I would be um, down there visiting with the parents, or he would stop by our house on his way up to towards Canada. Um, Not one time do I remember a conversation about what he experienced over there. And I for the most part, I never said anything about it because I figured, all right, if they're not going to talk about it, then I don't need to inquire. And also too, I had other uncles who served, in the various wars since then. And they ended up, taking on uh, that substance to help navigate what they were internally dealing with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a generational thing. I've met so many people with fathers that were in that same space. They
yeah,
just, shut it down, try to put it out of their minds as best they could, and then they self-medicated with
yeah,
alcohol of that time, and now more recently with other drugs. And fortunately, I think the tools are there for those who want to seek it out. But for many, the wounds are still fresh, the memories are still there, the PTSD is very real,
yeah,
and so they're still gonna isolate and not talk about it. And I understand that. I do.
yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. How was school for you during that time in California?
I have very happy memories of that period.
Okay,
But when we relocated to Colorado and things were really starting to spiral, my school memories were a little bit different from that. And that is because of all of the problems connected to the alcoholism and the mental illness. There were a lot of long nights,
okay,
a lot of sleepless nights, to be frank with you,
yeah.
a lot of nights I wasn't sure I was going to survive. And
Oh,
the
wow.
same with the
Okay,
same with my brother.
yeah,
Um, and so, what we tend to do when you go through that kind of trauma as a kid, you still try to get to school
hmm,
and you don't really say much about it.
right,
And I think in my case, I projected an air of being fine despite not having slept, and I
okay,
used humor a lot to
all right,
deflect, which I think is a sort of a survival tool for a lot of us that go through this kind of stuff.
yeah,
And again, looking back on my life, I guess that was in a way a gift, as weird as that sounds, because the humor did help me get through a lot of tough stuff.
yeah,
When you see things and you experience things, I think you have the choice of becoming part of the darkness
yeah,
or finding the light, and almost the bizarre humor that can arise out of these situations. And when I've talked to other people who've been through these kinds of things, we kind of share that quality a little bit, that you're either going to laugh or cry.
yeah,
And so, I channeled a lot of that humor into my school activities, which included journalism.
okay,
I ended up on the school paper. I was attracted to the whole, what really, now that I think of it, it's funny, this just popped in my head. One of my mechanisms for dealing with the world I was in was comic books, and especially
ah,
Superman, DC.
yeah,
And so Clark Kent in the Daily Planet. Wow, this guy's a reporter. That's pretty cool. I wonder what that's all about. So I joined the school paper in junior high. Now we call it middle school.
yeah,
And I continued that into high school, working on the school paper, and just found that I had this ability to write and to communicate, and that was a great way to channel that. I want to tell you briefly, because I made reference to it earlier, about my dad's Hollywood era.
hmm,
And when I became old enough to start looking back on things, when I had a lens that wasn't so close to it,
yeah,
I tried to find my dad's name in connection with Love That Bob or other 1950s projects.
okay,
And strangely, it didn't pop up in any of the materials that I was able to locate. And so that made me think, well, either he did the work anonymously or maybe he didn't do it at all.
interesting.
And it's a big question mark, and kind of in the background of all of this. The reason I'm able to talk to you today, Rich, is because of my grandmother, very, very selfless woman
Mm,
who was part of a whole different world than our world.
Yeah.
She was my mom's mom, and she was connected to my grandfather and the Denver Art Museum and all of the work he did with Native American artists. And she could have lived a really comfortable, stress free retirement.
Hmm.
But after she saw how our little family was spiraling, and then my dad just dropped dead of a heart attack one day in his early 40s.
Mm.
I was 14,
Wow.
leaving my mentally fragile mom in charge of our little 3-person family,
Right.
and it just devolved from there. Well, she obviously recognized what was happening and swept in, moved in, stabilized us, made sure that the rent was paid, that we had clothes on our backs, that we had food to eat. I would not be here without her. Her name was Frida Douglas, and we
Hmm.
called her Baba. And yeah, she is the reason that I think I was able to escape all of that and survive and hopefully thrive. So I wanted to
Yeah.
make sure I gave her some credit, but also that yeah, I don't know to this day, was my dad part of all of this, or was he just getting help maybe from Frida, or I'm not really sure to this day how that all worked out. But, you know, I do know one thing. At his funeral, it was a military funeral at Fort
Yeah.
Logan here
Yeah.
in Colorado. They gave him a 21 gun salute,
Hmm.
and his tombstone had the Purple Heart inscription and the Bronze Star. And he was a war hero, and he had his faults, and he was an alcoholic, but he went through hell.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
seeing that funeral and hearing those rifle shots that day when I was 14, sitting there under the canopy, smelling the smoke drifting over from the volley, and seeing the flag being folded into that tight triangle and being handed to my mom. Yeah, I saw my dad in a whole different light that day.
Yeah. I imagine so. And that service is what allows us to do what we're doing today. The freedom that we have, and the personally, I don't think we give um, enough gratitude to our veterans, um, because of literally the oath that they take to give up their
Mhm.
life and to endure all these things. So we have the ability to be free, have our
And
freedom.
and in the case of my dad and so many of his generation, I mean, they were 21,
Yeah.
19, 18,
Yeah.
going over to face the Nazis, not
Hmm.
knowing if they were going to come back.
Right.
So many of them died there that day on Normandy.
Yeah.
I read something today where there is a veteran, and there's so few of them left from that battle, saying there's a mountain of men and metal beneath the sands of Normandy. Pretty stunning when you think about it.
Oh, for sure. For sure. The other thing that's fascinating for me already is your grandmother stepping in. Um, I've had numerous guests and episodes where I've been able to recognize the fact that the grandparents have stepped in because the parents, for whatever capacity, whether it was just they were having to work so much or they had their own issues that they were dealing with, but they weren't able to give that love and comfort that was necessary for those kids, um,
Mhm.
during their lifetime. And those grandparents step in, make the difference in the world for them, um, show them the love, show them a way that's different than what they're experiencing when it's just them and their parents. Um, and I know I've had a really close relationship with my mom's parents, not so much with my dad's, Didn't know my grandfather on my dad's side because he passed 6 months before I was born.
Hmm.
Um, but my grandmother, all I remember um, is that she would sit up on her back porch and just kind of stare off into the backyard a lot. She didn't, I think some of the depression that I have experienced potentially is trickled down to the genes. Um, from that side of the family, and then to my great grandmother, who I was able to see her before she passed on my mom's side. Um, she was a midwife for many years in the East Tennessee mountain area, and she had a sadness about her as well. She didn't have running water where she lived. She didn't have electricity. Everything was oil lamps, and it had an outhouse out back and a water pump out back from a spring that she would get her water from. But yeah, the grandparents it have been a constant in this series of conversations where they've stepped in and taken over a little bit of the necessity of showing that love and a little bit of balance.
It's such a beautiful thing and such a selfless thing, and a great model for those of us who are lucky enough to be grandparents. And I
Right.
am one. And I think about her a lot in terms of my own dealings with my own kids, and what am I trying to teach them, and what kind of support
Yeah.
am I providing. And if you would allow me, I'd like to talk about my grandmother as it relates to this book, Poppy, that you
Absolutely.
referenced.
Sure.
So it's so interesting. She had this whole other life, as I said, and yet she didn't talk about it. It's kind of like my dad didn't talk about World War II. My grandmother didn't talk about this amazing chapter of her life involving the Denver Art Museum and these Native American artists until one day I was in high school. As I said, I was on the school paper, and she came into my bedroom, and she had this little magazine tucked under her arm, and it was a copy of Empire magazine. It was a supplement to the Denver Post.
Okay.
And she handed it to me and she said, Jack, you may want to hang on to this because it's about our family. I kind of looked at her, what?
Wow.
And the cover story was about the Douglas family, about her, her husband, this world that they had created up in Evergreen, which is west of Denver by about an hour in the mountains. And, I was still kind of the hippie, long haired teenager kid that, okay, cool, but I don't know that I really care.
Right.
And I put the magazine away. Fast forward many, many years later, after I've had this TV career and journalism career, somebody from the Denver Art Museum tracks me down at the TV station, calls me and says, are you Eric Douglas's grandson? I said, yeah. Well, I'm so and so from the Denver Art Museum. We have a society dedicated to your grandfather. What?
Oh, wow.
And we would like you to come lecture to our society at the Denver Art Museum about him and his life and his contributions. Let me tell you, Rich, I was in a panic. I was used to dealing with a lot of stress
Okay.
in the
Yeah.
world of TV news and deadlines and everything. But all of a
Right.
sudden, I am being asked to talk about someone who I barely knew through a magazine article and maybe a few conversations across the years.
Yeah.
And so I found that old magazine supplement, and that led me to some very fast research and a 90-minute lecture I somehow cobbled together before this Douglas Society. Being very
Right.
honest, I said, look, probably most of you know more about this guy than I do, but
Yeah.
I'm going to do my best. And so I kind of stumbled through this lecture. And after I was done, I made another promise, just like I did when I was a kid. I said, someday I'm going to write a book about him because he's so interesting and his life was so interesting. And he was certainly worth more than some stumbling lecture that I was able to pull together.
Yeah.
And so I did after I left the TV world. That's what I did. I took 2 years to write about Poppy, is how people called him, and
Okay.
I learned so many things during that 2 year period. And I'm happy to talk about him if you have that interest.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
All right. Well, I need to tell you that the reason that he had this love for Native Americans and the art that they created was because of his father. We're talking kind of, we got a theme going here, don't we, with families and
Yes.
generational ties.
Yep.
His father was an Episcopal priest, and he
Ah.
was widely known for his music. He was a music liturgist, that's the term. And he studied an ancient type of faith music that was
Okay.
called plain song. And I don't know if you've ever been in an Episcopal church or even a Catholic church, but if you ever hear monks singing unaccompanied, they're just
Yes.
chanting,
Yes.
that is called plain song. And it dates back centuries. It's ancient music. And his dad felt that this music opened up windows into heaven. And so
Oh,
he
wow.
dedicated himself to transcribing this music, adapting it for use in modern churches back in the late 1800s and 1900s, modern being a relative term.
Right.
Well, he was from the New York area. He was tireless in this, and he worked himself to exhaustion. And one day they found him at the base of his organ, passed out. He was in a coma because
Oh,
he
wow.
had been working so hard on this. I mean, he just would be around the clock trying to work on this music. And his superior said, well, I think you need to do something about your health. So they sent him out west, out here to Colorado, which is what a lot of people did back in the 1800s to
Hmm.
get better because of our skies and our clean air. A lot of
Right.
tuberculosis patients would come out here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he came out to try to improve his health. And somehow, I think instinctively, he thought to himself, rather than just spend time in a sanitarium, which is what a lot of people did to get
Yeah.
better, sitting on a porch, I want to go on horseback out into wilderness. So he got a horse and a bedroll, and he went to the Four Corners region, and he slept out under the stars. This was sort of the era of Teddy Roosevelt,
Yeah.
where, a lot of people felt this was the way to improve yourself as a person, is to get out there in the wilderness. And
Hmm.
he ended up spending 6 months out in this southwestern part of the country.
Oh, wow.
And in the course of that 6 months, he encountered the Hopi. And the Hopi were intrigued by this guy. And again, he was an Episcopal priest, but he didn't try to convert them or try to, impress upon them anything from his culture or his
Amazing.
background. He just
Yeah.
wanted to learn from them. And as part of that, he learned about their art, about their religion, about, just the ancestral ways that they would carry themselves.
Yeah.
And they ended up taking him in as a blood brother, made him a blood brother.
Wow.
And they called him Lomawana, which translated in English to tall pine tree, because he was a tall man. Well, he came back, met and married the nurse who was taking care of him at the sanitarium. And she was intrigued by all his tales from his experience in the Southwest. They moved up to Evergreen and they started building this beautiful log home, which they then decorated with Native American art, because he just ended up loving not only stuff made by the Hopi, but by the Navajo, the Cheyenne, so many different tribes.
Yeah.
They had this boy, his name was Eric, and this love of Native Americans was basically transmitted to him. And he ended up helping start the Denver Art Museum.
Okay.
and specifically the Native Arts Department. What it's called today is Native Arts. Back then it was called Indian Arts.
Mm-hmm.
But because of all this stuff that his folks had collected up at the house in Evergreen, that was pretty much the basis of the collection for the Indian Arts Department. It was mostly the family's stuff that they had bought that they put in this museum. And he started looking around at the different artifacts, and he said, sorry about my voice here.
That's all right.
He said, the only people that would really be interested in coming here are eggheads. That's what he called them.
Mm,
He said everything is trapped under glass. It's behind cabinets. There's little tiny plaques that explain what these things are. It's
right.
bad. I
Yeah.
need to do something with this. And so he came up with not only innovative ways to showcase this art. I mean, he would put it up on pedestals. He'd break it out of cabinets. He would paint backgrounds. He would change the lighting to make it more interactive and more interesting. And not only
Right.
did he do that, but he also provided a living for a lot of these Native American artists so that their work, once it was showcased in the museum, would motivate people to buy it, to go to the reservations and then buy a pot, a seed jar, a flute, whatever objects that were available.
Yeah.
And he put this art on the same level as a French Renaissance painting or a statue from Greece. And that was never really thought of that way by white
Right.
America up until
Right.
this point. A lot of people just thought, oh, this stuff is like some cheap souvenir you can find down in Santa Fe. And my grandfather, Eric Poppy, said, no, this is art that should be elevated in a museum and can beautify your home. He always used that term as well when he would try to convince people this is art for our time. It's not something stuck in the past. They're still making it to this day. And yes, some of it are ancient designs and patterns, but some of it is very innovative. And to this day, the techniques that he developed at the Denver Art Museum are in use not only here in Denver, but at museums throughout the world. And I'm very proud of that legacy.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. I had an opportunity, my only trip out west, I went to an art conference in Orange County. And on that flight, we had a layover in Denver. And when I walked through the Denver airport and saw how they had traditional pieces on display, I was blown away. Now, with my parents being both from East Tennessee and go to the Smoky Mountains, go to Pigeon Forge, Sevierville, all those little towns leading up into the Smoky Mountains. Once you go over the mountain, you go into Cherokee, North Carolina, and the reservation there. So I grew up seeing that as my example of what Native culture looked like. And a lot of it at that point in time was really, for lack of a better word, imported to sell cheaper. Um, and so I found it very contrasting on that trip when I was laid over in Denver, how they had displayed the garments, the original pieces that were created, and how authentically it was presented as well. That was so fascinating for me. One of the things that
Well,
I, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I discovered in this research helped provide an answer to me as to why my grandmother didn't really talk about this chapter in
Okay.
her life. Because again, she lived up in Evergreen. She was part of this world, but her husband was away a lot
Gotcha.
on different trips connecting with these artists. He was in demand as a museum consultant all over the United States and
Mm,
overseas. And so he was away a lot. And I think she never told me this, but after researching what I researched, I came up with the conclusion that she was left alone a lot
Right.
with the kids. And either there was just resentment or perhaps disappointment, whatever emotion, you want to assign to that. So
Yep.
that's why I think she didn't really talk about that part of her life. She was certainly proud that she was, connected to it. She was
Hmm.
a big city girl. She was from Philadelphia. And if
Yeah.
you can imagine Colorado in the early 20th century, it's not like the Colorado of today.
No, not at
There
all.
were a lot of dirt roads.
Yep.
Denver was considered a cow town. It was kind of a rough and tumble place. And so here's this big city girl from Philly, all of a sudden is inserted into this world. And so I'm sure it was hard for her. They met, I should say, when Eric was studying back east for his art, because at one point during his career, he wanted to be a serious artist
Okay.
himself. He wanted to
Yeah.
paint, but I think he came to the conclusion that he did not have the talent to be a respected painter. And so it kind of went in this different track into being a museum guy. And I will tell you, this might be of interest to you, Rich, and your audience. Um, you've probably heard of the Sand Creek Massacre. It's one of our more infamous chapters here in Colorado,
Yes.
where the army was sent in and basically wiped out this village on the eastern plains. Well, the governor at the time, Governor Evans, was infamously connected to that. His daughter, Anne, I think suffered tremendous guilt over her father's role in the Sand Creek Massacre.
Mm.
And she made it her mission in life to, I think, make up for it by trying to perhaps help Native American artists, just as my grandfather did.
Yeah.
And she was a neighbor of the Douglas family up in Evergreen. She lived in a cabin up there. And she connected with Eric over a dinner and proposed this idea of starting a Native Arts Department, an Indian Arts Department at the Denver Art Museum. And so if it wasn't for her, he would never have really been on a Denver Art Museum track. But she was honest with him, saying, you've got the basic skills of being a painter, but you're never going to be in a gallery. So how about you help me get this project started?
Oh,
And so
wow.
she
Okay.
she she recruited him. And it wasn't just the Denver Art Museum. She also was a key pioneer in our Denver Public Library, in the opera, in just a lot of performing arts. And again, my theory, she was doing it out of her past and her father's past, trying to maybe overcome some of the evil that had been perpetuated.
Yeah. Very commendable. Very commendable. One of the things that I found very fascinating when you were talking about your great grandfather, um, and the music that he was trying to create and make, and then comes out west, connects with the Hopi. And from my personal understanding, music has always been a way for Native culture to be able to connect to the higher spirits as well, which is what your great grandfather was doing. He felt that was a window into the higher realms. Um, I found that very fascinating. As soon as you said it, I was like, oh, no wonder he was so connected once he started learning from them. I imagine it was um, a renewal for him at that point.
Well, you've really put a whole different light on this. I don't know that I'd really ever thought of that. But now I have this image of him sitting around a campfire with some of these blood brothers, perhaps listening to that music and
Yeah,
the healing that it provided him. That's
yeah,
really good. I really like that. I like thinking about that. Another motivational aspect to this period there was real concern on the part of people like Ann Evans, not so much my grandfather, but she was very specific in this. She was afraid that the Native American was in danger of extinction.
Mm,
That because of what white America had done in shunting a lot of these tribes onto reservations and sending young kids to Indian school to try to get the Indian out of them.
yeah.
She was afraid that a lot of their traditions, their art, their language was going to go away. And so she was really motivated to try to preserve a lot of this culture because of this threat. Now, Eric Douglas did not think that. He said, "Look, they have been here for thousands of years. They'll be here for thousands of years after we're gone. So don't worry about them.
Yeah.
Worry about us." But she was of that group, and there were others like her. Um, Typically, they were wealthy. They were social
Mm,
reformers,
right.
and there was one amongst this group who referenced the music that we just talked about. Um, she actually, Natalie Curtis was her name. She, on her own, went to these different reservation areas with a brand new, then invented recording device from Thomas Edison.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was like the big bulky phonograph with the big horn you can think of. Think about this,
Yeah.
riding on horseback to
Yeah.
some of these areas. And there were wax cylinders to record
Yeah.
whatever you wanted to record.
Right.
And that was her mission. She went in the backcountry to record Native American songs of what we're talking about
Wow.
so that she could preserve them, just like my grandfather with plain song wanted to preserve and then put the notes down onto actual music sheets. She was doing that for some of these tribes, and she was in great demand on the lecture circuit, especially back east. You can think, those folks, to them, the Wild West was the
Right.
thing. Some of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
pulp magazines and pulp novels were feeding this very stereotypical view of cowboys and Indians and all of that. So they were fascinated to hear this woman talking about it. But she was a tough lady in terms of going out there and doing what she did. And she was actually part of a group of ladies. There's a great book I'd like to recommend for anyone who is interested in this era called Ladies of the Canyon. And
Mm,
it talks about Natalie Curtis and others who were, again, part of this same group of folks that were just doing what they could to identify a lot of, you know, beautiful Native American work that they
yeah.
wanted to preserve, sometimes to protect it. So that for those who thought it was going to disappear, and others like my grandfather, who just realized this is a living art that we need to elevate and make sure people are aware is there and is still being made.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. Your story is so rich with history, Jack. And it was definitely one of the reasons why I'd reached out to you. Because I had a feeling that once we started talking, that it would start coming out in that way. Um, and I'm very glad and grateful. Um, One of the things that I'm curious about in terms of some of your story, once you got into doing uh, the school newspaper, working in that and writing and seeing how it was put together and all of that, from a creative mindset and possibly a little bit of escape, did you find that something that you thought was going to be the thing for you moving on to the rest of your life?
I think deep down I did.
Okay.
And again, it's interesting, these things you're triggering in my head today. I haven't thought about this for quite a while. I have to credit my dad for all of his problems and demons because I was doing a book report. This was back when we were, in Colorado. We moved from California, and I was worried about fitting in
Right.
elementary school, being the new kid from California. And we'd been assigned a book report. We could pick any book we wanted. And I picked one about Tom Swift. And this may or may not ring a bell for folks. But when I was a kid, Tom Swift was really cool. It was a series of books, kind of like the Hardy Boys. It's
Okay.
about
Yeah.
this kid inventor that just was so brilliant. He, it was Tom Swift and his rocket ship, and Tom Swift and his submarine, and he was just inventing all of these things and having all
Yeah.
these amazing adventures. I love Tom Swift, and so I went to my dad and I said, Dad, I have to do a book report, and I've never done one. Do you have any thoughts about how I could do it? And he said, why don't you make a shoebox theater? And I
Oh,
said,
wow.
well, what is that? He said, well, I'll tell you, you take a shoebox, take out the paper, the little tissue that's inside, flip it over, cut a couple of slots in the bottom of the shoebox. Then you get some cash register tape and draw on that cash register tape different scenes you want to talk about from the book that you read.
Mm.
And then you pull the cash register tape through the slots in the bottom of the shoebox theater. So while you're talking, you can show what it is that you're talking about.
Right.
That was my first exposure to multimedia, when you think
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, for sure.
And it was a hit. I'll tell you that. Instead of some dumb kid just sitting up at the front of the board droning on, I had my shoebox theater.
Right.
Although I think about it now, I wonder, could those kids have really seen those little panels? I don't know. But so, yeah, looking back, I think that was a way for me to channel my creative instincts, just like it was with the school paper.
Yeah.
And the reason I ended up on the broadcast track is kind of fascinating. I had a journalism teacher in high school we called Mrs. Mack. She was amazing, wonderful instructor, just thought, you thought you could do anything. She was one of those kind of teachers that just, you've got the potential.
Yeah.
It's there. You can do it.
Yeah.
Well, one day she was instructing up on the third floor of our high school, and she looked out the window and she noticed a news crew that was packing up. They had done some kind of a story, a TV news crew at our high school. So she opened the window, and I'll never forget, she yelled down and said, hey, we're a journalism class. Can you come up and talk to us? And so they did. And it was a reporter and a photographer. The reporter's name was Ron Mitchell. The photographer's name was Butch Montoya. And they told us they were from KBTV, the ABC station in Denver, Channel 9. They told us about a typical day and about the adrenaline that fueled them to get through the different deadlines and the pressures. And I was just smitten, to use an old-fashioned word. I just thought, how cool would it be? Just like with Clark Kent and the Daily Planet. This is a real Clark Kent standing in front of me. And so from that moment forward, I wanted to be part of that TV news world. Well, Mrs. Mack, again, found this flyer from New Mexico State University that said, hey, there's a broadcast 2-week practicum, they called it. Go down, try it out, be exposed to a student radio station and some of the tools and things we have, see if you want to come here to school. So my best friend and I ended up doing that. We ended up going to New Mexico State, where I ended up learning all about TV news, broadcasting, radio. And that set me on a path that lasted really from then until today as a storyteller. And I am so grateful to Mrs. Mack for opening that window that day. Well, here's the real cool part of the story, Rich. Those two guys that came to our room that day, I ended up working with them.
Oh, wow.
And I ended up managing one of them, which I thought was nuts.
Yeah.
I was the executive producer. Ron Mitchell was the reporter, as I said. Butch Montoya ended up being a manager, so we were managers. But I said, Ron, you got to understand, I was the kid in journalism class and you came that day and we're talking about your job.
Right.
I shouldn't be your boss. And he was so generous and so humble. And he said, you are the executive producer. You need to approve my script and you need to be honest. Ron was amazing. He has passed away, but I am so thankful that I got the chance to work with him and with Butch and so many people at Channel 9 that were just amazing, gifted storytellers and journalists. But yeah,
Yeah.
if you can believe it or not, I ended up working with those guys.
That's wild. That's wild. And also too, I think that it, it lends to the, again, for lack of better words, the integrity of journalists back in that time, to just to even recognize the fact that you're saying I shouldn't be above you. But yet he was humble enough to realize that he needed somebody to kind of take a look at what he had created and just give him some kind of feedback. And I think you having that career perspective of being that kid who listened to him when he came to speak, and now it's kind of put into another position where you're working directly with him and over him, essentially. He had the humility enough to say, it doesn't matter what your position is. I just need you to make sure what I'm about to put out is the right thing to put out.
And I would add, he was open to innovation,
Yeah,
even at a later stage of his career. He had
yeah,
nothing to prove. I mean, he'd gotten all the awards and all the recognition and everything else, but he wanted to continually be up to date. And so
right.
I think some of us that had come in from other places were bringing in that perspective. And I would like to think that is still happening today at the station at a time when journalism is under such stress and
Yeah,
such pressure and such polarization. It's funny, I never thought of myself as being part of the legacy media, which is now how people look at that.
yeah.
Um,
New
all I
brand.
knew, all I knew was, it was important to tell you what was going on
Yeah,
in a way that was as unbiased as you possibly could make it, that
yeah.
was factual. We had a sign on the newsroom at 9. It's still there to this day, accuracy first.
Oh,
And so when
wow.
you walked into the newsroom, this vast newsroom and all its computer terminals and the assignment desk and the editing and everything, accuracy first. That's what you saw. And we really felt that we were helping uh, the cause of democracy. If you look at the founding fathers and why they made the free press and free speech such a big deal, it is a pillar. And now everybody's got a newsroom in their pocket and
Yeah,
everybody's got a voice. And sadly, a lot of us are now in these little bubbles that we can design and live
right.
in blissfully.
Yeah,
And as I think I told you before we started, my advice to anybody about information is to try to vary the diet. So you
hmm,
have a lot of different sources coming in and that you are making up your own mind and not just parroting what somebody else is thinking or saying.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. I wanted to touch base on your brother a little bit. Was he younger or older?
Younger brother, his name was Chris. And he's a big part of why I wrote this book, too.
Okay.
Chris was a very talented artist, speaking of artists.
Yeah.
And I think he could have ended up as one of those guys that drew for DC, drew
Oh,
Superman, or
really?
one of the many superheroes. He was so good with
Okay.
anatomy. And I remember asking him to do a comic strip for the high school paper. We called it Super Jock. And it was a little bit of a takeoff on the Superman type character and interacting on a high school level.
Right.
Um, And he did some amazing work with that. Sadly, after high school, the art kind of faded from his life, and some other things took hold. And he got into, you know, a rough crowd and some bad influences and drug abuse,
Okay.
alcohol abuse, and he ended up taking his life.
Mm.
Um, and that was the result, really, of a workplace shooting of which he was a victim.
Wow.
Um, because of this rough crowd that he was part of, one of these people was mentally unhinged. They had some kind of a squabble, and he ended up going to my brother's workplace, shot him multiple times. Ironically, Rich, it happened while I was producing a newscast, and I had sent our helicopter, Sky 9, over the site of the workplace shooting, not realizing it was my own brother.
Oh, wow.
In fact, it wasn't until after the show ended and I was down in the newsroom, we were doing what we call our post show, where we talk about, how things went.
Yeah.
And I got a call from the police department, and they asked me, "Are you John Maher?" They always use John when it's something serious, so I knew it was bad. Well, yeah, what's happening? And he told me, and I went to see him in the hospital. And because he was physically very, very fit, he survived being shot multiple times, believe it or not,
Mm.
but he did not survive psychologically
Right.
or emotionally. And again, we were brothers. We had gone through all of these other things with our parents and the tough times. He, just like me, came to know about the whole Denver Art Museum component and that phase of our family's history.
Yeah.
And one of our last conversations was in the front seat of my car. And he said, "Jack, will you make me a promise?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "Will you write a book? Write a book about our family?" And I said, "Yes, I will. It may take me a few years because I was raising a family and had a busy TV life. But I promised him that I would." And so at the very beginning of this book, I say, "For Chris, a promise kept."
Yeah.
And I'm so glad I was able to do that. And I think about him a lot. And I just, you wonder what might have been if he had just gone in a different direction. But I'm so glad I was able to honor that promise.
Yes. Absolutely. I'm glad you're able to do that as well. Um, I'm glad that you're able to share that with the audience. I appreciate that. Uh, that is not the direction that I thought it was going to go in, but
Sorry.
no, that's all right. It's all right. I think a lot of times this conversation allows for opportunity of things that are not always um, brought to mind
Yeah.
regularly
Yeah.
to come up and come out, and hopefully there's some clarity that helps bring a little bit more healing
Yeah.
to the guest
Mm-hmm.
with this conversation. And I know it's a very difficult thing to look at, especially a sibling who
Yeah.
you see the potential,
Yeah.
the opportunity that's showing up early on, and even more so knowing of what you both dealt with early on as younger siblings,
Mm-hmm.
and to have
Yeah.
it turn into that type of an ending too early. That's difficult. It's very difficult. um, I I have a sense of understanding, not a complete understanding, but a sense of understanding uh, based on my own personal story of what the mind does um, to daily life and trying to get through a day, and how a lot of times there's a voice that's in there that just keeps chirping, and we can't get it quiet. And we opt to try to bring it to finality. Um,
And Rich, what's so interesting as I sit here and think about all of this, some of the same tools that I used during the alcoholic mental illness years
yeah.
at school to pretend everything was okay came right back after Chris's death.
Mm,
Because I don't think a lot of people in the newsroom knew, you know.
yeah.
I just really didn't make a big deal about it. There was a few, but I think I just submerged a lot of the pain and a lot of the misunderstanding of what happened. And I just plunged right ahead back into the TV world and the deadlines and the adrenaline.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wasn't really until years later that I think I fully, you know, tried to embrace it. And I haven't really talked publicly much about Chris, but I think it is a little bit of an echo, that these things you learn as a trauma survivor, as a
Oh, yeah.
kid,
Yeah.
come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most definitely. Most definitely. And even from the creative perspective, a lot of times we're able to utilize your creativity to help navigate us through some experiences. Um, but from what you're saying, it didn't seem like Chris was able to use that as a way
Yeah.
to cope a little better.
Yeah. I think because he clearly, endured the same stuff as
Yeah,
me. We went
yeah,
through it together. We processed it very differently, I think.
hmm yeah,
And he was just, again, drawn into this other world that, by that point, we weren't living together anymore. We'd moved on.
yeah,
I'd gone on to college and career and everything, and he'd gone on to his life. And so, yeah, yeah. And I need to tell you, both of these books, they uh, they did channel a lot of things,
yeah,
because this one, the second one that just came out this year, is about my sweet Becky. And I think for both Poppy and You Were Chosen Just Like Mary, I channeled my grief into the writing of these books.
okay,
And I would just advise any artist out there or wannabe artist that if you suffer some kind of loss or challenge, to think about using your gift as an artist to tap into that.
yeah,
There's a book out there called Dark Night of the Soul
oh
by
yeah,
Thomas More,
hmm
and it draws upon ancient Catholic teaching that basically says, okay, when you come across something bad, something rough happens in your life, you have two choices. You can sit in the darkness and spiral, or you can mine it for the gold it contains.
yeah,
And I think that is what I have tried to do with these books. I mean, I haven't even gotten into my story about Becky, and I don't know if you have the time for that, but um, it was another case of just mining something very sad for something good.
yeah, yeah. Let's step into that if you are
Yeah,
open to it, Jack.
you bet. You
Let's
bet.
let's let's start talking about how that came about.
You bet. All right. Well, I need to take you back
All right.
to November 21st, 1970. And some of this is going to be through a very Catholic lens. So I hope that's okay.
No, totally fine.
So there was this Catholic school in Denver. And this was during the period, not long after my grandmother swept in and stabilized us. So I started to feel kind of like a normal teenager again. And so there was this dance Friday night at this school, St. James. And I went, and back in those days, we actually had live bands, and you actually asked girls in person to dance. I don't know how people date now,
I
but
don't either.
but back then, that's how you met people.
Yeah.
And so I'm in this gym, this Catholic school gym, and I look across the floor. I'll never forget, very shiny wood floor. And there by the exit is this beautiful, gorgeous redhead, way out of my league. The band was doing a lot of covers, and they started playing Neil Young's Cinnamon Girl. I don't know if you've ever heard that song. It's a great
Yeah,
song.
I have. Yeah.
And it was perfect because there by the exit was a cinnamon girl. I went up to her and I said, "Would you like to dance?" And she turned and she had the most beautiful, shy smile. And she said, "Yes." I said, "Well, I'm Jack." And she said, "I'm Becky." And we fell in love. And that led to a marriage and 3 children and 2 grandchildren.
Wow.
Beautiful life, almost 49 years together.
Oh,
A lot of
wow.
great experiences. I had my crazy TV news life. She had her life as a corporate travel agent. But just you could not have asked for a better wife, a better life partner. And she was such a good mom, so full of joy, and the way she looked at life was so sunny and goofy and surprising. She still lights my heart.
Yeah.
Well, one of our kids, our oldest, ended up being a Navy combat pilot.
Okay.
Something I never saw coming. Certainly wasn't in my genes. But that was the case, and he was flying this aircraft. Those of you with military connections might have heard of it, particularly if you're in the naval aviation community. It was called the Growler, later the Prowler, electronic attack aircraft.
Okay.
It would send it to all the hot spots, Iraq, Afghanistan, and it had the capability of knocking out electronics from the air, things like improvised explosive devices, disabling, terrorist cell phones, you name it.
Right.
Very, very expensive aircraft, $65 million a copy. And I always joked, wow, not that long ago, I didn't trust this kid with the car keys. So anyway, a lot of dangerous work flying onto aircraft carriers, and, you never knew a lot of the time where he was, what he was doing. And so Becky got pretty anxious about him.
Yeah.
And I was a convert from Episcopalian.
Okay.
I became a Catholic to marry Becky. She was very Catholic. Her whole family was very Catholic, big Catholic family. And so, we went to Mass regularly, but she started up a practice in our faith called Eucharistic adoration. And so every Friday night after work, she would go, and in our faith, we believe that the bread that is consecrated at Mass is truly the body of Christ. That's what we believe. And the wine is changed into the blood of Christ. So on Friday nights, she would go into this little chapel at our church and just spend time with what's called the Eucharist, with that bread that's been consecrated. It's in a beautiful sunburst, a gold sculpture that looks like the sun sitting on the altar. And you just spend an hour, just, whatever trouble you've got, just try to let God handle it. Take it off your shoulders for a while.
Yeah.
And she found it was really, really helpful, not only for our son, a Navy guy, but for our other 2 kids too, because, we all had our challenges like any family. Well, this particular night, May 31st, 2019, and these dates I'm giving you are important. I'll explain why.
All right.
She was in the chapel with just one other guy, and he was a real troubled soul. He was weeping openly, just having a real tough time.
Mm.
And Becky, even though she was this corporate travel agent, was pretty shy by nature. That was one of the qualities you loved about her. After the hour was up, they were going out of the chapel to their cars in the church parking lot, and she approached him. She said, I couldn't help but notice you're new here. And I wanted you to know that we have a beautiful church here. It's called Ave Maria. And a great pastor, great ministries. You know, you're going to like it here. And she said, you know, I'm in this ministry that is kind of interesting. It's called the Guardians. I said, the Guardians, what's that? And he said, well, it's where we are asked to be in the front of the church during communion as people are taking the body of Christ, to make sure they're treating it with care. It's something our pastor thought was important to do. You know, we're very, you know, kind of hidden. You wouldn't know that we're even there. But it's kind of funny because pretty much everybody in this ministry is a guy, except for me. I'm the only girl.
Mm.
And so this stranger turned to her and said, so you were chosen, just like Mary.
Wow.
And Becky then fell. It was a brain aneurysm, and it was massive.
Oh, my word.
And she was with us for 3 days before she passed. Well, Rich, as you can imagine, I was in shock. My family was in shock when we got the call to come to the hospital. We had not heard any of this. We just knew that she had a brain aneurysm in the parking lot. And we can't understand it.
Right.
Becky was all about health and fitness and nutrition. Why? A brain aneurysm? There was no history.
Yeah.
And I get this call, and it's one of our deacons. His name was Deacon Pete. And he said, Jack, do you know, are you doing okay? I said, well, not really. Not really. He said, well, do you know what happened last night? And I said, well, I know that Becky fell. I know it was a brain aneurysm. And they say that she's not going to survive. He said, well, you need to talk to this man who was with her.
Mm.
And he gave me the phone number, and I called. I found out his name was Oliver. Oliver was an immigrant from Nigeria, and he was in the chapel that night because he was having trouble adjusting to our culture, our language, everything connected with this big move in his life, this big change.
Yeah.
And when I asked him about what happened, and he said, well, then I told her you were chosen just like Mary. And he started crying. I started crying. I said, Oliver, what did you say? He said, you were chosen just like Mary. I don't know what motivated him to say that.
Yeah.
But I got to tell you, Rich, all of the grief that was bottled up inside me spiraled out.
Wow.
Because to me and to my family, when I heard this, I realized this wasn't just some random medical incident.
Right.
For a stranger to tell her that, and then
Yeah.
for that to happen. And that was just the start. My granddaughter, she pointed out on our Catholic calendar, she said, Granders, that's my grandfather's name. Granders, do you know what day this was? I said, well, May 31st. No, look at it. It was the Feast of the Visitation in the Catholic calendar. The day when we celebrate Mary visiting her cousin Elizabeth. Mary is pregnant with Christ. Elizabeth is pregnant with John the Baptist. John the Baptist leaps in the womb to have the Savior near. And that got me thinking, well, I'm going to look at the night we met, November 21st. That's the Feast of the Presentation, when Mary was presented at temple by her parents. Mary was at the beginning. Mary was at the end.
I've got chills, Jack.
Rich, this was only the start. This was only the start. I have been on a 6-year spiritual journey since that night in the parking lot to try to better understand what God was trying to tell me and us through this. I have been to the Holy Land on a pilgrimage right before the war. I have been on a Marian apparitions pilgrimage to Fatima, to Lourdes, to Medjugorje, and I'm going to Rome at the end of next month.
Mm.
And it's all in service to understanding this. And again, I don't want to monopolize your time you're giving me here, but I will just tell you that I have had some incredible graces, physical graces that I know are from God.
Yeah.
And I look back on our life together with Becky and myself and all the things that we've been through, my brother's suicide, a lot of other stuff. God was there. Mary was
Mm.
there. I just didn't realize it.
Yeah. Do not do not think that you're monopolizing the time. We've got all the time in the world, Jack. So
All right. Well, then
I
I'm going to
want
tell
you
you
to
some
be,
more stuff.
please
Okay.
do. Yes.
And I hope wherever people are on their own spiritual journey, whether you're Catholic, whether you're an atheist, wherever you may be on that spectrum, I just hope this will be of some use to you. I
Yes.
will tell you that writing about it, as a journalist, I knew that I was putting a lot on the line, and a lot of people are going to think, "Oh, Jack's gone off the old rails."
Right.
But I can tell you this: I have produced thousands of hours of news. I know fact from fiction.
Yep.
What happened that I write about in this book happened. I'm not some guy on a bar stool telling you some story. Well, after Becky died, and we had this funeral, I had Oliver speak at this memorial afterwards. And he,
Mm.
he sang a beautiful canticle about his faith. And he ended up discerning whether he should pursue a religious vocation because of this. He went to a monastery in New Mexico. And this period of discernment, people that feel called to be a priest or a monk or a nun, that's part of the deal. You go and you listen to see what God wants you to do. And I lost touch with him. Only
Mm.
recently did I find out that Oliver ultimately decided that that was not going to be his calling, but he is doing something else that's beautiful. And he credits Becky in part for what he's doing now. We have mountains here in Colorado. They're called 14ers. And people always like to try to, the more physically fit, to climb them. And they bag a 14er. They're able to say, yes, I climbed Mount Elbert or Long's Peak or any of these other mountains. I'm not one of those people. But Oliver has made it his mission to climb all the 14ers by the end of this year. And he carries a bag of rosaries with him. Rosaries are prayer beads in our faith, and they help
Yeah.
us to pray. And he hands them out to people that are willing to take them. That's his mission.
Mm.
But anyway, after the funeral, we decided to go on a family hike. And Becky and I loved a place called 3 Mile Creek up near Guanella Pass in the mountains because it had columbines that grew along the river. She loved columbines. So we thought it was a great way to, honor her and her love of nature and family. Well, on the way back from the hike, we were driving on this road over by a reservoir, and there was a thunderstorm that was starting to brew. And a rainbow started to form. And Rich, that rainbow extended from the storm onto the road in front of us.
Mm.
And we drove into it. Our car filled with light,
Wow.
with all the different hues of the rainbow.
Wow.
I looked at my daughter I looked at her then boyfriend, now husband. We just started crying. It has never happened in my life, anything like that. It hasn't happened since. But driving through a rainbow, again, you look at all of this, the dates, the fact that it happened at a church called Ave Maria, which translates to Hail Mary,
Yeah.
which is very central in our prayers as Catholics. That this is a story of someone who is comforting a stranger. It was almost biblical. Becky and I are we are organ donors. There's an alliance here in Colorado called the Donor Alliance, and they help you with all of those things at the hospital when it's clear that your loved one is not going to survive. And we had signed do not resuscitate orders well ahead of time, which I would advise anybody to think about doing if you haven't for your planning. In Colorado, it's as simple as checking a box on the back of your license. Becky's gifts of life helped 80 people the world over.
Wow.
And you have this option of being in contact with any of the people that receive your loved one's gift of life.
Oh, wow.
And so I said, yes, sure. Out of those 80 people, only one contacted me. His name was Paul. He was in the last stages of kidney failure in Missouri. I flew to meet Paul. And as you can imagine, it was a very emotional meeting. We hugged. I showed him cell phone videos of Becky so he could get to know her, and knowing that she was living on in him. And I said, Paul, you need to know something. Your name is very significant to us. Paul was the name of Becky's little brother who died of cancer when he was 4.
Wow.
And the fact that you're the only one out of those 80 people to connect with us. It's just another, some people call them God winks.
Oh,
I'll
yeah.
call him a God smack. that he was working, that Mary was working through all of this.
Yeah.
And again, there are many, many more things to tell, but I'll just leave the book to do most of the work. And
all right.
I dedicated this one to Becky. And I said, for Becky, my forever pal, because that's what we called each other, my pal. So there's my stories.
That's fantastic. Truly connected in so many different ways to literally that title that Oliver spoke into reality.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And I will say that I am so glad that he's back into my life. I really was worried that, we'd never see each other again. And Rich, I've had such extraordinary things happen as part of this 6-year journey. When I was in the Holy Land, it's interesting, just as I kind of shut down, from the trauma of my brother, a little bit with Becky, actually. I mean,
Yeah.
I was a lot more public with what had happened, but not with all of the details.
Mm-hmm.
But there were even people in my community at the church at Ave Maria that had not heard this story. And I was on this pilgrimage to Jerusalem at the Church of the Visitation. Very emotional day, as you can imagine, for me.
Yeah, for sure.
As I see this mural, this beautiful mural of Mary on a donkey going to visit her cousin Elizabeth, and she's accompanied by angels. And I'm thinking about Becky and everything that happened. And after the Mass, we did daily Mass during our pilgrimage. I'm outside the gates of the church, and I just lost it. I'm just breaking down. And one of our priests said, "What's going on? Are you okay?" And that's when I told him the story. He'd never heard it. And when he did, He was profoundly affected. And he went on to ask me to tell Becky's story every time we have new people coming into our church,
Oh,
testimony.
yeah, yeah.
And so once a month, ever since, that's what I do. I just did it this week again. It takes a little bit of my heart every time,
Right.
but if in some way her story and my story can soften hardened hearts
Yes.
and bring them hope,
Yeah.
then it's worth it.
Yeah. That that thought right there, Jack, is I think what is so powerful in you continuing on with this book that you've written about this story, the willingness to be here with me today to share this to the creative community. Um, I think it'll do exactly that.
Well, we have a saying in the Catholic tradition, there is a great cloud of witnesses.
Yeah.
And if I can be just a little wisp, a little piece of that cloud,
Yeah.
then I think God put me into this story. Because you got to think about that too.
Oh, yeah.
He put me into this story for a reason.
Yeah.
And I could have kept it hidden, never talked about it, just like my dad didn't talk about his World War II experiences, or my grandmother kind of limited talking about her life with the Denver Art Museum. But not this. I felt compelled to share this. Too many incredible things have happened to keep this quiet. And so you can think of me what you want, but I will tell you the people that have taken the time to read this book and this story, it's brought a lot of them back into the church that had left.
I, I imagine. I imagine so. The interesting component for me in creating this platform is because part of my story has a winding road through faith and belief, and now to a new understanding. Um, I started off in public school, and in third grade, I was going into the fourth grade for the afternoons because of the creative things that my teachers were seeing within me. And at the end of that third grade year, they came to me and offered for me to go into this accelerated program called Project Plus, which was for students who were showing this creative uh, flair, this creative spark, um, and to give them a little bit more exposure into what possibilities could be. And what was going to take place is when I moved into the fourth grade, I'd be going for half a day to the high school at that point. So I would have more access to art classes and different things like that. But at that point, my parents had been going to this new fundamental Baptist church, and the church decided that they were going to open a school. And so my parents pulled me out of public school, pulled me out of this opportunity that I felt like was going to be something that really allowed me to express more. And so I was put into this fundamental Baptist school, which was it was small. I was in the same class with seniors essentially because it was so small, and it was a, a self-taught study program. It was called the Becca Book Education ACE training, accelerated Christian education. So each course per year was broken into 12 booklets. So you could go through them as fast as you wanted to, or however. But over the course of the years, being in that environment, I always had these questions pop up. I always felt like I wasn't getting the full story from what I was learning in church or in school or different things like that. And the other component to this is the fact that my mom's father was a Southern Baptist minister
Mm.
in Tennessee. And during the week, he would work on his farm. And when we were down there, I was kind of like his sidekick. I was ready to go out the door as soon as he was. And if I woke up and he was gone, I would be like, okay, where's he at? I need to find out where he's at. And one day, him and my grandmother had been out somewhere to something that had to do with part of his ministry. And they stopped by the Kmart on their way home. And she went inside and he said, I'll just sit here and wait on you. And he had a massive heart attack right there. So my grandfather passed when I was 11.
Mm.
But I felt so comfortable when I was around him that it was just unreal. Unreal. Fast forward, I've gone through this Christian school, went off to a private Christian college called Pensacola Christian in Pensacola, Florida, attempting to study graphic design. And the reason that I was even looking at that school is because the school had their own publishing company. So a lot of the students who were in the art department went on to work in the publishing department, creating these books and educational materials and stuff. I wasn't able to finish out a degree there. I was having to pay for it on my own. I was having to work while I was there. The workload in terms of course study was too much for me. I couldn't handle it. And art was the only thing I was doing any good in. So I had to ultimately just decided to come back home and not continue to pursue that. And that began really a period of deep depression that would start to set in. And it started off earlier on, probably, honestly, I can remember as far back as 3 being depressed and sad about the world and what I was experiencing at that point in time. But it really kicked in after this college letdown. And at that point as well, I was starting to get more and more disillusioned by what I was seeing from elders in the church, people who we were told we were supposed to be respectful of and give them respect because of their positions. But I was seeing things that were contradictory to all of that. Fast forward to 2012, and I have this friend I'm hanging out with, working with. He has his own company, and the lady that he was married to was psychic. Now, based on everything I was raised to believe, you didn't mess with psychics. It was witchcraft. You didn't go around it. You didn't even dabble in it. And she had an interest in talking with me, and I never really understood why. I kind of just kept her at a distance and hung out with her husband because he was my friend. So I just let it be at that. And after a while, they ended up getting to a point where they got divorced. And she had reached out to me to try and see if I could give her some insight into what I knew about him and what may have been going on from his side of the perspective that she might find some clarity in. And I started to realize that she didn't seem to be that quote unquote witch type person, that she seemed rather normal. and started to find some of her perspective very interesting. And one day I asked her, I said, would you do a reading for me? And she said, no, you're not ready. I was like, okay, this is strange. And so a few times after that, I'd asked her, would you do a reading for me? She'd said, no, you're not ready. And finally, the final time I asked her, she said, no, you're not ready. And I said, I am ready. Like, if I'm ever going to be ready, I'm ready now. And she started telling me some information about what she was receiving in terms of visuals and information that there was no way possible she would have any knowledge of. And what she started describing to me was an instance that my grandfather and I had when I was a kid after a day of working out in the hay, mowing a field of hay, and it being so hot and we just being tired and sweaty. And we decided to go to town to get some kind of refreshment to cool off a little bit. We went to town in his truck. We pulled into this grocery store parking lot, went inside, got something to cool us off, came back out, dropped the tailgate, and just sit on the back of that truck, cooling off, relaxing. And she starts describing this information to me in detail. Now, I had not told anybody. He didn't tell anybody. It was just our thing, just between us. And the more and more as the information came through, I was realizing this is my grandfather. Now, my brain is not really comprehending what's happening because it doesn't seem possible that this person that I've told, or that I've been told, that her ability is complete witchcraft, that she's able to do this. Even more so that my grandfather, who's the Southern Baptist minister, is the one who's bringing this message through her to me. And ultimately the message was, you know more than what most do know. And what you know and understand and can sense is true. And it's even more than what you've learned over the course of the years. And I'm just bawling at that point. Mm-hmm. Because it's a realization that, yes, this is my grandfather giving me this message through her. That all of the stuff that I had known and felt and sensed about not getting all of the information in the way that I was raised, that there was more to it than that, was finally some clarity, and that I could start to open up a little bit more. And so I've told this a few times throughout the episodes, but I feel that it's even more poignant in this episode with what you described in a sense as a God wink, which is the term that I use. Mm-hmm. But you also said it was a God slap that you experienced.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Rich, thank you for sharing your heart with me that way. It says everything about you. And I will say the veil between here and there is very thin.
Yes.
And it's very easy sometimes to see that other side if we just open our minds a bit to it, to the possibility of it.
Yeah.
I'll just leave it at that.
Absolutely. And our hearts as well.
Yep.
Yeah. And the reason that I brought that up, Jack, is because it not only is this platform for creatives who may or may not struggle with mental health issues, but it's also it, even more evident today, has been a component of reaffirming faith within individuals and what that can do for them and help them moving forward in life, and the resiliency that it can build up if it's something that individuals wish to be open to. And if that's the thing that helps them, then all the better. Um,
I know it sounds really crazy to say, but sometimes suffering can be a gift to a
yeah,
creative.
yeah, yeah. And with that as well, it can also be the thing that changes everything.
Mm-hmm. If you let it.
Right, right.
Sometimes it takes a lifetime to understand that.
It does. Absolutely does.
I
Jack,
am
this
gonna
go
gonna have to run. I've got a meeting to get to, but I just want to say, Rich, that I've done a number of these podcasts, and I've never had one go as deeply as you've gone with me. And I am so appreciative of you and what you're doing with this podcast and with your life. Uh, you are providing some very badly needed light in a dark world.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And back at you. I appreciate you being open and sharing as you did today. I truly believe that this is a fantastic place for us to be able to close out. I appreciate the extra time that you took to be able to go into some more of the story of your life. And one of the things I always want to remind the audience at the end of each one of these is to listen to your heart, but also be kind to your mind.
Love that.